Have you ever wondered why loneliness and isolation seem to find you at the most critical moments of your life? What if this painful separation wasn't a punishment, but rather a calling? Carl Jung discovered that isolation is often the first step toward a profound awakening of consciousness. When we are forced to step away from the external world, something extraordinary begins to happen. We are invited on a journey inward. The feeling of being alone, abandoned, and misunderstood can be the gateway to your true purpose. In this video, we will explore how isolation is not your enemy, but perhaps the most powerful catalyst for your personal transformation. What will you find when you finally have the courage to confront your own abyss? This is the story of your awakening, told through the profound revelations of one of the greatest psychologists of all time. In a world constantly pulling us outward, demanding our attention through notifications, social obligations, and endless distractions, the experience of isolation can feel like punishment. Yet what Carl Jung understood, perhaps better than anyone, was that this separation is not just necessary, it's sacred. When we find ourselves isolated, whether by circumstance or by choice, we enter what Jung called the night sea journey, a profound psychological descent that precedes any meaningful transformation. Like Jonah in the belly of the whale, we must be swallowed by solitude before we can emerge renewed. The natural response to isolation is resistance. We feel the sting of rejection, the anxiety of missing out, the fear of being forgotten. Your social media feeds continue without you. Gatherings happen in your absence. The world spins on, seemingly indifferent to your separation from it. This pain serves a purpose. It breaks down the social identity you've carefully constructed, the persona Jung identified as the mask we wear to function in society. The persona, Jung wrote, is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society, fittingly enough, a kind of mask designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other, to conceal the true nature of the individual. In isolation, this mask becomes unnecessary. Without an audience, who are you performing for? As the persona dissolves, something remarkable begins to happen. The voice in your head, the one you've ignored while keeping busy with external demands, grows louder. At first, this inner voice might seem like an enemy, confronting you with uncomfortable truths, forgotten dreams, and neglected wounds. This is not coincidence, it's emergence. Jung observed that our most significant psychological growth often follows periods of profound isolation. The energy previously directed outward now turns inward. The psyche, no longer distracted, begins its work of reorganization and integration. What seemed like abandonment becomes invitation. Consider the pattern throughout history: Moses in the wilderness, Buddha under the Bodhi tree, Jesus in the desert. Isolation preceded their greatest insights. This pattern repeats not because suffering is inherently valuable, but because separation creates the necessary conditions for deep listening and transformation. Your isolation has created space for what Jung termed active imagination, a method of engaging with your unconscious, not through analysis, but through direct experience. Without the noise of external validation and social feedback, you can finally hear the whispers of your authentic self. The initial pain of isolation eventually gives way to a curious freedom. When no one is watching, you can experiment with new ways of being. You can drop pretenses and examine the parts of yourself you've hidden from others, and perhaps even from yourself. Jung believed this process of meeting oneself was essential for psychological wholeness. In our connected age, true isolation has become increasingly rare. We carry global connection in our pockets, the voices of others always within reach. This makes natural periods of separation even more psychologically jarring, but potentially more valuable. The discomfort you feel in isolation isn't evidence that something is wrong. It's evidence that something important is happening. Your isolation is not random. It has come to you as an opportunity for what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, distinct from collective expectations and inherited patterns. This separation is not a detour from your life's path. It is the path itself, leading you toward greater authenticity and wholeness. The question isn't whether you'll experience isolation, we all do, but what you'll do with it when it arrives. Will you rush to fill the void with noise and distraction, or will you accept the invitation to journey inward, to face yourself honestly, perhaps for the first time? Jung observed that the psyche naturally seeks balance. Your isolation is not punishment, but recalibration, a return to center after being pulled too far in one direction. The disconnection you feel now is preparing you for deeper, more authentic connection later. In the quiet of your separation, something is awakening. The self you were meant to become is finding its voice. Listen carefully. This necessary separation isn't taking you away from your life, it's finally bringing you home to it. When isolation strips away the distractions of daily life, we inevitably come face to face with what Jung called the shadow. Those aspects of ourselves we've denied, repressed, or never fully acknowledged. This confrontation, while often uncomfortable, holds the key to extraordinary psychological growth and empowerment. The shadow is not simply our negative qualities, as is commonly misunderstood. Rather, it contains all that we've deemed unacceptable, including positive traits and abilities we've disowned because they didn't fit our self-image or social expectations. Jung observed that the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality precisely because it represents everything we've tried to separate from our conscious identity. In isolation, the shadow emerges with startling clarity. Without the constant validation of others reinforcing your persona, the disowned parts of yourself begin to surface. You might experience unexpected anger, unfamiliar desires, or creative impulses you've long suppressed. These aren't aberrations, they're revelations of your complete self, aspects that have been operating beneath your awareness, influencing your behavior and relationships in ways you couldn't recognize. What makes this confrontation particularly challenging is that we often project our shadow onto others. We criticize in others what we cannot accept in ourselves. This is why Jung famously noted that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. In isolation, with external targets for projection removed, we must finally own these projections. The qualities that most disturb you in others may point directly to disowned aspects of yourself waiting for integration. The shadow gains power through denial. The more vigorously we push away certain aspects of ourselves, the more autonomously they operate in our unconscious, sometimes sabotaging our conscious intentions. This is why psychological growth requires not eliminating the shadow, but acknowledging it. As Jung put it, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This making conscious is exactly what isolation facilitates. When you're alone with yourself, the internal divisions become more apparent. The idealized self-image you've constructed begins to crack, revealing the fullness of who you are, both light and dark, creative and destructive, loving and fearful. This can be a profoundly disorienting experience, what Jung might call the dark night of the soul. But it's precisely this disorientation that precedes genuine psychological rebirth. What many find surprising is that the shadow doesn't just contain negative qualities, it also holds our unrealized potential. Perhaps you've denied your ambition because you were taught to be humble, or suppressed your creativity because you were told to be practical. or concealed your sensitivity because you learned it was weakness. These gifts remain in the shadow, awaiting reclamation. The paradox of the shadow is that what we resist persists, while what we acknowledge can be transformed. By denying aspects of ourselves, we give them power over us. By embracing them, we reclaim that power. This doesn't mean acting out every impulse. Jung was clear that consciousness comes with responsibility, but it does mean honestly acknowledging the full spectrum of your humanity. This shadow work is particularly important during periods of isolation because we're often isolated precisely when these disowned aspects are pushing for recognition. The breakdown of relationships, career setbacks, or health crises that lead to isolation are frequently triggered by shadow elements demanding attention. The isolation isn't punishment, it's opportunity, creating space for integration of what has been denied. The courage to face your shadow leads to what Jung called the treasure hard to attain. By embracing the disowned parts of yourself, you discover a more authentic wholeness. The energy previously spent maintaining internal divisions becomes available for creative expression and genuine connection. The self-knowledge gained through shadow work allows for more conscious choices rather than unconscious reactions. This is why isolation, rather than being merely an absence of others, can become a profound presence with yourself. The darkness you encounter isn't evidence of failure, but the necessary counterbalance to consciousness. Like the darkness of soil from which plants grow, your shadow contains the nutrients for psychological growth. Those who emerge from isolation without confronting their shadow remain fragmented, prone to projection and unconscious behavior. But those who accept the invitation to shadow work discover a new kind of integrity, not perfection, but wholeness, the authentic integration of all aspects of self. This is the power that awaits in your dark side, accessible only through the courage to look at what you've been trained to ignore. In periods of isolation, something remarkable happens to our dream life. The unconscious mind, no longer competing with the constant stimulation of social interaction and external demands, begins to speak more vividly through the symbolic language of dreams. Jung considered dreams to be the royal road to the unconscious, and during isolation, this road often becomes a highway of extraordinary psychological activity. Dreams have always been with us, of course, but isolation creates optimal conditions for both their intensity and our receptivity to their messages. Without the usual morning rush, the alarms, commutes, and immediate social obligations, we can linger in that liminal space between sleeping and waking where dream content remains accessible. This is precisely why Jung placed such emphasis on dream analysis during periods of psychological transition. Dreams, Jung wrote, are impartial, spontaneous products of the unconscious psyche, outside the control of the will. They are pure nature. They show us the unvarnished natural truth. This natural truth becomes particularly important when our conscious mind is grappling with the disorientation of isolation. The dreams that emerge during these periods often carry a compensatory function, balancing what our conscious attitude lacks or denies. Consider what happens physiologically during isolation. Sensory deprivation increases the brain's sensitivity. Similarly, social deprivation heightens our psychological sensitivity to internal signals. The dreams that emerge aren't random neurological firings, but meaningful communications from parts of ourselves seeking expression. Jung observed that dreams often introduce material that the conscious mind has overlooked or rejected, providing a more complete picture of our psychological reality. During isolation, several distinctive patterns of dreaming frequently emerge. First are what might be called connection dreams, vivid encounters with significant others, past relationships, or even archetypal figures representing human connection. These dreams reflect the psyche's need for relationship even when external relationships are limited. Rather than dismissing these as mere wish fulfillment, Jung would encourage us to engage with these dream figures as meaningful psychological presences. Another common pattern during isolation involves dreams of confinement and liberation, being trapped in small spaces, searching for exits, or suddenly discovering vast new rooms in familiar buildings. These dreams often directly reflect our psychological relationship to isolation itself. The emotional tone of such dreams, whether claustrophobic or expansive, reveals much about our conscious and unconscious attitudes toward our separation. Perhaps most significant are the big dreams that often emerge during prolonged isolation. Unlike ordinary dreams processing daily residue, these carry profound symbolic significance and emotional impact. They frequently feature universal symbols that Jung identified as archetypal, images and scenarios that appear across cultures. And throughout history, encounters with wise figures, journeys through unknown landscapes, deaths and rebirths, these archetypal dreams often mark significant psychological transitions and offer guidance when our conscious mind feels lost. What makes dream work particularly valuable during isolation is its dialogical nature. Dreams invite us into conversation with ourselves, establishing what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold the tension between conscious and unconscious until a new, more integrated perspective emerges. This inner dialogue counteracts the absence of external dialogue that isolation imposes. Jung provided specific techniques for working with dreams that become especially valuable during solitude. Active imagination, entering the dream space while awake and continuing to engage with its figures and scenarios, allows for conscious participation in unconscious processes. This practice transforms passive dream experience into active psychological work, particularly important when external activities are limited. Similarly, Jung encouraged capturing dreams through writing, drawing, or other creative expressions. This externalization helps preserve dream content that might otherwise dissipate and creates a tangible record of the inner journey. During isolation, keeping a dream journal becomes not just a psychological tool, but a meaningful daily practice that honors the unconscious as a source of wisdom. What many find surprising is that dream life often intensifies not just during isolation, but specifically toward the end of isolation periods, as if the unconscious is preparing us for reintegration with the outer world. These transitional dreams frequently contain symbols of transformation: butterflies emerging from cocoons, seeds sprouting, doors opening to new landscapes, reflecting psychological processes nearing completion. Unlike Freud, who viewed dreams primarily as disguised expressions of repressed wishes, Jung saw them as purposeful communications, guiding the process of individuation. In isolation, when the usual external guideposts for identity are removed, these communications become essential navigation tools for the inner journey. They remind us that even in our most solitary moments, we are never truly alone. The unconscious continues its work of psychological development, speaking to us through the ancient language of symbol and metaphor. By learning to listen to our dreams during isolation, we transform what might feel like empty time into a period of profound psychological discovery. The messages from the unconscious, when properly attended to, provide not just insight, but the creative energy needed for transformation. This is why Jung considered dreamwork not merely therapeutic, but essential for psychological wholeness, particularly during those periods when external life is restricted and the inner life naturally expands to fill the space. Break time threes. Isolation, while challenging, creates the perfect conditions for what Jung considered his most significant contribution to psychology, the process of individuation. This powerful concept represents the central journey of human development, not just growing up but becoming whole. As Jung put it, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and isolation often serves as the crucible for this transformation. Individuation is easily misunderstood. It is not about becoming perfect, achieving some idealized state, or separating oneself from others in permanent isolation. Rather, it is the process of psychological differentiation, having as its goal the development of the individual personality. In simpler terms, it's about discovering and integrating all aspects of yourself to become uniquely and authentically who you are meant to be. During normal social life, we constantly adapt to external expectations. We modify our behavior to fit and gain approval and navigate complex social environments. Jung called this adaptation necessary, but noted that it comes at a cost. We often sacrifice aspects of our authentic self to maintain these adaptations. In isolation, these external pressures recede, creating space for what Jung called the voice of the inner man to emerge. The individuation process follows a distinctive pattern that becomes particularly visible during periods of isolation. It begins with what Jung termed dismemberment, a psychological breaking apart where established identity structures become unstable. This often manifests as confusion about who you really are when the social mirrors that usually reflect your identity are removed. The discomfort of this stage explains why many people frantically try to escape isolation rather than move through it. Those who endure this initial dismemberment enter what Jung called the encounter with the archetypes, psychological patterns, and energies that transcend individual experience. You might find yourself drawn to particular symbols, stories, or figures that seem to carry special significance. These archetypal elements aren't random. They're providing psychological templates for aspects of self previously undeveloped or unexpressed. One of the most significant archetypal encounters during individuation is with what Jung called the self, not the ego or conscious identity, but the regulating center of the entire personality. This encounter often feels numinous or spiritual, as if connecting with something larger than oneself. During isolation, when external stimulation diminishes, these self-experiences become more accessible, sometimes appearing in dreams as extraordinary figures or in waking life as profound moments of insight and integration. The individuation process also involves what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold opposing aspects of personality in creative tension until a new, more inclusive position emerges. Isolation provides ideal conditions for this function because we're freed from the pressure to choose sides or present a consistent face to the world. Instead, we can acknowledge our contradictions and allow seemingly incompatible aspects of ourselves to dialogue with each other. What makes individuation during isolation particularly powerful is its authenticity. Without social rewards for particular behaviors or identities, what emerges is driven by internal rather than external factors. The choices you make when no one is watching reveal who you truly are. The interests that persist when there's no one to impress indicate genuine passion rather than performance. Jung observed that individuation often requires periods of what he called constructive regression, returning to earlier psychological states to retrieve aspects of self left behind in development. This might manifest as reconnecting with childhood interests abandoned for practical concerns, or rediscovering emotional expressiveness sacrificed for professional composure. Isolation creates space for this retrieval of lost parts, allowing for a more complete psychological integration. The common fear that individuation leads to selfishness or disconnection misunderstands Jung's concept. As he emphasized, individuation does not shut one out from the world, but gathers the world to oneself. The more fully you become yourself, the more genuinely you can connect with others from that authentic center. This paradox, that true connection requires differentiation, becomes especially clear when emerging from periods of isolation with a stronger sense of self. The process isn't always comfortable. Jung noted that individuation often involves what he called legitimate suffering, the necessary discomfort of growth. Unlike neurotic suffering, which simply repeats old patterns, legitimate suffering moves us forward psychologically. The loneliness of isolation can be part of this legitimate suffering, creating the conditions for genuine development rather than mere adaptation. What many find surprising is that individuation actually leads to greater connection with humanity, not less. As Jung observed, in the last analysis, we count for something only because of the essential we embody, and if we do not embody that, life is wasted. By becoming more fully yourself, you paradoxically access the universal in the particular, connecting with others at a deeper level than possible through conformity. The ultimate outcome of successful individuation is what Jung called the enlargement of personality. Not just knowing yourself better, but becoming more of who you potentially are. This enlarged personality has greater access to its full range of capacities, more flexibility in response to life's challenges, and deeper resources for meaningful connection. Isolation, by temporarily removing external definitions of self, creates optimal conditions for this enlargement. When you eventually emerge from isolation, having engaged with the individuation process, you carry this enlarged self back into relationship. This is not returning to who you were before, but arriving as who you more fully are. The ultimate gift that isolation, when consciously engaged, can offer your becoming. Throughout human history, across disparate cultures and spiritual traditions, the figure of the hermit emerges repeatedly as a powerful archetype embodying the transformative potential of voluntary isolation. Jung recognized this universal pattern as the hermit archetype, a psychological constellation that activates during periods of necessary withdrawal from the social world. Understanding this archetype provides profound context for personal experiences of isolation. The hermit appears in countless cultural forms: the desert fathers of early Christianity, the forest-dwelling sadhus of Hindu tradition, the mountain ascetics of Taoist practice, and the vision-seeking solitary rituals of indigenous peoples. Jung observed that such widespread appearance of similar patterns indicates something fundamental in the human psyche, an innate understanding that certain kinds of knowledge are accessible only through solitude. What distinguishes the hermit archetype from simple loneliness is its purposeful nature. The hermit withdraws not from weakness, but from wisdom, recognizing that certain inner developments require temporary separation from collective influences. This purposefulness transforms isolation from punishment to pilgrimage, from exile to expedition. As Jung noted, solitude is for me a fount of healing which makes my life worth living. The hermit carries specific symbolic attributes that reveal its psychological function. The lantern, present in tarot and mythological representations, symbolizes the inner light of consciousness, illuminating previously unseen aspects of self. The staff represents support drawn from within rather than from external sources. The simple robe signifies the shedding of social identities and pretensions. These symbols emerge spontaneously in dreams and imagination during isolation, indicating the archetype's activation. In Jungian understanding, archetypes possess both positive and negative expressions. The negative hermit manifests as pathological, withdrawal, misanthropy, and disconnection from human community. The positive hermit embodies wisdom gained through reflection, independence of thought, and the courage to pursue inner truth regardless of social pressure. During isolation, consciousness determines which manifestation predominates, whether we use solitude as escape or as transformation. The hermit's wisdom centers on several key psychological insights that become available through solitude. First is the distinction between loneliness and aloneness, the former being the painful absence of others, the latter the fulfilled presence with oneself. Jung emphasized this distinction, noting that many people flee from true aloneness into social distraction, never developing the capacity for self-companionship essential to psychological maturity. Another hermit wisdom is the recognition of society's conditioning influence on individual consciousness. Jung observed that the individual is forced to be what society requires, but the hermit creates space to distinguish between authentic self and social conformity. This discernment becomes possible only through stepping back from the collective field of influence, creating psychological distance that allows for objective self-observation. The hermit also embodies the wisdom of patience and timefulness. Unlike modern culture's emphasis on immediate results, the hermit understands that significant psychological development follows natural rhythms that cannot be accelerated. During isolation, this patience becomes necessary. Transformations unfold according to their own timing, not our preferred schedules. This acceptance of natural psychological timing alleviates the anxiety of isolation, replacing urgency with trust in the process. What's particularly interesting about the hermit archetype is its temporary nature. Even the most committed historical hermits often eventually return to society in some capacity, bringing their insights back to the collective. Jung emphasized that complete individuation always includes reintegration with community, bringing one's unique gifts to the collective. After discovering them in solitude, this cyclical pattern of withdrawal and return appears consistently across hermitic traditions. The hermit's wisdom also includes what Jung called active imagination, a state of receptive attention to internal processes without the distractions of external stimuli. This receptivity allows for encounters with other archetypes and aspects of the unconscious that might remain inaccessible amid social business. Many report that isolation naturally induces meditative states that would require disciplined practice to achieve in normal social conditions. Modern neuroscience provides interesting context for the hermit's ancient wisdom. Studies of sensory deprivation show that reduced external stimulation increases neural activity related to introspection and self-reference. The default mode network, brain regions active when not focused on external tasks, becomes more prominent during isolation. What hermitic traditions discovered experientially, science now confirms physiologically. Isolation changes consciousness in specific and potentially valuable ways. The relevance of the hermit archetype has perhaps never been greater than in our hyperconnected age. Jung would likely view our constant digital connectivity as creating a collective consciousness field of unprecedented strength, making genuine psychological individuation more challenging. The voluntary disconnection advocated by the hermit, creating periods free from social media, news cycles, and constant availability, becomes a radical act of psychological self-preservation. What's most valuable about recognizing the hermit archetype during personal isolation is the context it provides. Your experience connects you to a timeless human pattern rather than simply marking you as socially deficient. The discomfort of isolation becomes meaningful rather than merely painful when understood as part of an archetypal journey undertaken by countless others throughout human history. The wisdom of the hermit ultimately teaches that isolation isn't something to merely endure until real life resumes, but rather an essential life phase with its own purpose and value. By consciously engaging with this archetype, perhaps through reading hermetic texts, studying historical hermits, or simply honoring your isolation as purposeful, you transform separation from burden to opportunity, accessing the ancient wisdom that has always resided in solitude. Perhaps your isolation is not a detour from your path, but the path itself, finally revealing its true direction. For it is only in the quiet depths of solitude that we hear the whispers of our authentic self, calling us toward what we were always meant to become. The world will tell you that separation is failure, but Jung understood a profound truth. Sometimes, we must lose our place in the world to find our place in the universe. Your isolation isn't punishment, it's an initiation. The question isn't whether you'll walk through this darkness, but what you'll bring back when the light returns.